Well, the three hardest questions I get asked is, what's your job, where do you live, and how do you get paid? And I don't have any easy answers to those frequently asked questions. But just recently I saw a photo on the internet, and it was of a bus shelter with a graffiti on it that read, "Mondays aren't so bad, it's your job that sucks." And when I saw this picture, it reminded me that for about the last 19 years, I haven't hated Mondays. In fact, the last time I probably hated Mondays was when I was at school. Unless there was a double PE lesson, and then I was kind of okay with Mondays. But for me, the journey of not hating Mondays has been an interesting one. I grew up in a country town in South Australia, and I always had passions as a kid. My passions early on was cricket and Aussie rules football, and they still are. But I had those passions, and I'm actually the youngest of 6 children, and I'm 9 years younger than my next brother. So I was sort of the big mistake, or the bonus baby, depending on how my family was thinking about how I was behaving at the time. But I grew up with a lot of nephews and nieces from quite a young age. And so I knew fairly early on as a fairly young person that I also wanted to be a teacher. And that was something that sort of stuck to me. And then I went through school, finished up in high school, and was able to go to university and study education. But I decided to take a gap year. And in my gap year, I went and worked in a bakery in Japan through some kind of amazing circumstances. Now, I didn't speak Japanese, I didn't know how to make bread, but I thought I'd give it a crack anyway. And after a couple of months, I could speak okay Japanese. My baking skills were up to standard, where people weren't dying from my produce. And I learned a couple of things from that experience. You know, as a kid, I thought, well, I wanted to be a teacher. I didn't really expect to go and work in a bakery in Japan, but it just sort of happened, and it made me realise, oh wow, you know, I could probably go and do anything I wanted in the world. You know, to be a teacher, I was meant to go on this pathway and do this thing, then this next thing, and then this next thing. But then working in a bakery in Japan wasn't on that straight pathway. And so what it did is it opened up my horizons and thought, well, okay, there's a limitless amount of opportunity to go and do things and be in places. And that's the other thing that changed for me. Instead of thinking about what did I want to be, I started more to think about, well, what do I want to do? You know, what experiences do I want? I want to learn languages. I want to travel to different countries. I want to meet interesting people. And so those two questions are very different from each other, as opposed to what do I want to be and what do I want to do? And so after that, after my gap year, I did go back to university, went through university, and I graduated as a primary school Japanese teacher. But I'm still yet 19 years later to actually teach primary school Japanese. Because once again, I had one of those sliding doors moments of, do I go and start teaching in South Australia for a couple of years, earn some money, and then start heading off overseas? Or do I just head off overseas straight away? And again, it was like, well, what do I really want to do, as opposed to what I want to be? And what I wanted to do was to get the hell out of Adelaide and other places and go and start travelling. Not that there's anything wrong with Adelaide, but just to head off and start travelling into the world. And so I went and worked in a ski resort in Colorado, a little bit of teaching in the UK, travelled to Morocco and Iceland, and then headed to a small mountainous country in Central Asia, to Kyrgyzstan. And there I went to go and climb mountains. It was a passion that came to me whilst I was in university. And so my primary reason to be there was to climb mountains, but I thought, well, I might do some volunteering while I'm here as well. At that time in 2001, Kyrgyzstan was a very poor country, and I was intrigued to try and connect with people and listen and learn and see what they were up to. And so I ended up volunteering at a university in Kyrgyzstan, in an eastern city, in a beautiful spot, Alpine Lake, huge snow-capped mountains, the whole deal. And whilst I was there, my passions kind of flipped over from climbing mountains to volunteering, because I learnt so much from the teachers that I was working with in Kyrgyzstan. Now, the salary for these women was $40 for 1 month as university teachers. And so from these women I learnt a lot. I learned a lot about resilience, resourcefulness, what was important in life, and how to connect with people at a scale that I'd never really seen before. And so the lessons that I took from that was to think about, well, what purpose do I want to fit into this world? Is it just about having a house and a family and a car and going to work and those sorts of things? Or is it about who I can be in the world? And a formula that I suppose in hindsight that I suppose I used was this idea of gift plus passion equals change. So I had to think about, well, who am I as a person and what do I want to see in the world? And basically I realised that my gift was education. I enjoyed being a teacher. My passion was to travel and to connect with people. And through putting those two things together, how could I create change? Because in that time in Kyrgyzstan, I'd found a purpose, a much higher purpose than just my own success in the world, and that was to see access and opportunity, regardless of where we're born. Because I knew growing up in Australia and in Adelaide that I had access and opportunity to clean water, health, education, and being able to travel. And my friends, they didn't have the same access and opportunity just because of where they were born. And so with that, in my backpack, so beautifully described, that I had to carry that with me in everything that I did. So I attached this to feed my sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose was to see the end of extreme poverty, to be a part of reducing inequality, and to protect our planet. Okay, not by myself, but being a part of that movement to try and work towards that. And so from that time, I travelled and continued to teach in different places across the world in many different continents. And it was on one of those trips after quite a few years, and I was travelling from Arctic Canada. I was doing some work up in the northern part of Canada above the Arctic Circle. And then I travelled all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, down the bottom of South America, over 2 years without any flights. And lots of volunteering and climbing mountains and wonderful experiences. But at that time, I got down to the bottom of South America and I was getting close to my late 20s, and I sort of thought, I started to feel the pressure of society and my parents and family and friends saying, well, it's maybe time you should settle down. Get a job and maybe find a family and get a house and all that sort of thing. I thought, that's probably what I should do in my late 20s. So I headed back to Australia and I became a teacher at a primary school in rural South Australia and loved it. It was great. I was a year 3-4 teacher. I taught them a lot about different countries that I've been to, maybe not so much literacy and numeracy, but they've all graduated now, they all seem to be fine. And I had a ball, it was great. But I also ran the 40-hour famine that year for the school. And I did the famine myself, and I was about 30 hours into the famine, and I went out camping by myself. And then again, it sort of hit me. I realised that I was listening to my head and not to my heart. And what my head was telling me is what I should do, as opposed to my heart, which was telling me what I wanted to do. And yes, I loved being a primary school teacher in rural South Australia and playing footy and all that sort of stuff. But really what I wanted to do was to be back on that mission of working towards ending extreme poverty and reducing inequality. And so I decided, I finished that school year and then decided to head off once again and out into the world. And since then, I've realised that there's a pretty good formula for how I had accidentally come across this idea of following my purpose. Now, there's a concept or a word in Japanese called Ikigai, and its translation is a reason for being, or my personal translation of it is a way to not hate Mondays, basically. And the concept of Ikigai says that there are 4 components that we should have to try and find our purpose. The first one is do something you love. The second one is do something you're good at. The third part is do something the world needs. And the fourth one is do something you can get paid for. And I was usually pretty ordinary at that fourth one, but as long as I was following my passion, it didn't matter so much. But actually what I found is that the more you sort of throw yourself at the world, the more it tends to catch you. And so I was very lucky, and again by accident most of the time, to have found my Ikigai and to try and live that sense of purpose in a combination of all these things. And so after having taught in rural South Australia for a year, I then went and volunteered in Ethiopia with AVI, Australian Volunteers International, rode my bicycle around New Zealand, built 2 tiny houses, one in New Zealand and one in just south of Adelaide. Worked with UNICEF and Gates Foundation in South Sudan, Pakistan, Uganda, all sorts of different things, and had lots of fantastic and wonderful, fulfilling experiences and trying to feed that sense of purpose of making a difference in the world, at least from an individual level. And then there was another tipping point. In 2014, I had a concept that was bubbling away in my mind that I really wanted to put into thought. And so I went for a walk. And I walked 1,000 kilometres in Japan until I got shin splints, which really hurt. And then I jumped on a bike and rode another 1,500 kilometres. So I had a long time to think about this concept. And that concept was called, or is called, teaspoons of change. And these are our personal choices, decisions and actions that have a positive impact on people and the planet. So I tried to focus on, well, myself as one individual. You know, what can I do? What are my choices, decisions and actions that do have a positive impact on a daily and almost minute-by-minute basis? And with that sense of, I suppose, empowerment, it's like any action I have has some kind of impact in the world. So the more good actions that I can take, then the better the impact is. And then I can share this concept with other people. And then the other thing for Teaspoons of Change is that it feeds into a global framework, a collective context that you might be familiar with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now this is what I love, is that we can feel as individuals that we can make small and seemingly insignificant choices, but actually this is what it means to create change in the world, that all of us feed into trying to achieve some big goals that none of us can do by ourselves. And if we work together with our own little teaspoons of change, we can end extreme poverty, reduce inequality, and protect our planet together collectively. And so for me, this is why I love waking up on Mondays and pretty much any day of the week, is that I realise that my personal actions do have a place in the world, that I can participate in a world to see some wonderful things. So to go back to the 3 questions that I started with, what's your job, where do you live, and how do you get paid? I still don't have any easy answers for myself, but the main thing is that I don't care. I'd much rather live my purpose, my passion, than being able to answer those questions, even for my poor mother. And then the final thought that I want to leave you with is, well, what is it that might make you not hate Mondays? How might you find your passions and a purpose? And it's a Friday today, and already I'm looking forward to Monday. Thanks for having me.